Katerina Yaka watched the German soldiers flee. Streaming from the east, that's what she was seeing. Allied bombers flew above them. She thought they all might die, and then soon there was the silence of all the SS men. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. They all sang the Internationale. Katerina Yaka saw red flags flapping in the breeze above the Russian tanks, and she fell upon her knees. And so many different voices in so many different tongues sang the most beautiful song that could ever have been sung. In German, Lithuanian, in Polish and in Dutch, a myriad of melodies has never had been such. In Russian and in Yiddish, Italian and French, emerging from the forests beneath the trench. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. They all sang the Internationale. Völker hört die Signale auf zum letzten Gefecht. Die Internationale erkämpft das Menschenrecht. Völker hört die Signale auf zum letzten Gefecht. Die Internationale erkämpft das Menschenrecht.
Hello and welcome to Revolutionary Socialist Review. This is Chris Driscoll, and along with me is Rainer Shea. We will be your co-hosts tonight. This is February 24th as we speak and as we're recording. However, you'll probably see this February 25th. Anyway, starting out right at the top, Vladimir Putin's televised address on Ukraine, which he did this morning. Probably most of you by now will be aware that the Russian Federation has come to the aid of the Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republics, two areas of that are right next door to one another in the far, far southeastern part of Ukraine. And this comes on the top of 8 long years of the Ukrainian Nazis, the Nazis that President Obama installed in power in a bloody, illegal coup d'etat in 2014. It was basically, most of it happened in February 2014. And these Nazis who've been running Ukraine ever since have been ever since then on an 8-year quest to ethnically cleanse and genocide against the Lugansk and Donetsk republics, but not just the Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republics, but against all of the Russian-speaking and ethnic Russian people of Ukraine. They made speaking Russian illegal, if you can believe that. They actually made it illegal for these Russians and Russian speakers to speak Russian. And these are between 1/3 and 1/2 of the entire population of Ukraine. So this is a lot of crimes against humanity, war crimes against the Russian-speaking and ethnic Russian people of Ukraine and of the Lugansk and Donetsk republics. 8 years worth. And now President Vladimir Putin has had it enough. He's had it up to his nose. As he himself said, this is a long time in coming, and he should have done this a long time ago. That's an exact quote from President Vladimir Putin. He should have done this a long time ago. Well, he finally did it. This morning, in a blitzkrieg kind of operation, the Russian forces basically took out all of the command and control military apparatus of Ukraine. So good job there. And I agree with Putin. He should have done this a long time ago, because this is 8 years of this horrendous crime against all Russian-speaking and all ethnic Russian people of Ukraine that's been carried out by the Nazis that President Obama installed in 2014 in an illegal, bloody coup. So first of all, I'm going to read you some highlights from Vladimir Putin's televised address on Ukraine that he delivered this morning. It would have been the early hours of the morning for us here in the United States. And he says, I will begin with what I said in my address on February 21st, 2022. I spoke about our biggest concerns and worries, and about the fundamental threats which irresponsible Western politicians created for Russia consistently, rudely, and unceremoniously from year to year. I'm referring to the eastward expansion of NATO, which is moving its military infrastructure ever closer to the Russian border. It is a fact that over the past 30 years, we have been patiently trying to come to an agreement with leading NATO countries regarding the principles of equal and indivisible security in Europe. In response to our proposals, we invariably faced either cynical deception and lies or attempts at pressure and blackmail, while the North Atlantic Alliance continued to expand despite our protests and concerns. Its military machine is moving, and as I said, is approaching our very border. There are many examples of this. First, a bloody military operation was waged against Belgrade without the UN Security Council's sanction, but with combat aircraft and missiles used in the heart of Europe. The bombing of peaceful cities and vital infrastructure went on for several weeks. I have to recall these facts because some Western colleagues prefer to forget them. And when we mentioned the event, They prefer to avoid speaking about international law instead of emphasizing the circumstances which they interpret as they think necessary. Then came the turn in Iraq, Libya, and Syria. The illegal use of military power against Libya and the distortion of all the UN Security Council decisions on Libya ruined the state, created a huge seat of international terrorism, and pushed the country towards a humanitarian crisis catastrophe that into the vortex of a civil war, which has continued there for years. The tragedy, which was created for hundreds of thousands and even millions of people, not only in Libya, but in the whole region, has led to a large-scale exodus from the Middle East and North Africa to Europe. A similar fate was also prepared for Syria. The combat operations conducted by the Western coalition in that country without the Syrian government's approval or UN Security Council's sanction can only be defined as aggression and intervention. But the example that stands apart from the above events is, of course, the invasion of Iraq without any legal grounds. They used the pretext of allegedly reliable information available in the United States about the presence of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. To prove that allegation, the US Secretary of State held up a vial with white powder publicly for the whole world to see, assuring the international community that it was a chemical warfare agent created in Iraq. It later turned out that all of that was a fake and a sham, and that Iraq did not have any chemical weapons. Incredible and shocking, but true. We witnessed lies made at the highest state level and voiced from the highest UN rostrum. As a result, we see a tremendous loss in human life, damage, destruction, and a colossal upsurge in terrorism. Overall, it appears that nearly everywhere in many regions of the world where the United States brought its law and order, this created bloody, non-healing wounds and the curse of international terrorism and extremism. I have only mentioned the most glaring, but far from only examples of disregard for international law. This array includes promises not to expand NATO eastward even by an inch. To quote George Herbert Walker Bush, even by an inch. To reiterate, they have deceived us, or to put it simply, they have played us. Sure, one often hears that politics is a dirty business. It could be, but it shouldn't be as dirty as it is now, not to such an extent. This type of con artist behavior is contrary not only to the principles of international relations, but also and above all to the generally accepted norms of morality and ethics. Where is the justice and truth here? Just lies and hypocrisies all around. Incidentally, the US politicians, political scientists, and journalists write and say that a veritable empire of lies has been created inside the United States in recent years. It is hard to disagree with this. It is really so. But one should not be modest about it. The United States is still a great country and a system-forming power, All its satellites not only humbly and obediently say yes to and parrot it at the slightest pretext, but also imitate its behavior and enthusiastically accept the rules it is offering them. Therefore, one can say with good reason and confidence that the whole so-called Western Bloc formed by the United States in its own image and likeness is, in its entirety, the very same empire of lies. In December 2021, we made yet another attempt to reach agreement with the United States and its allies on the principles of European security and NATO's non-expansion. Our efforts were in vain. The United States has not changed its position. It does not believe it necessary to agree with Russia on a matter that is critical for us all. The United States is pursuing its own objectives while neglecting our interests. Of course, this situation begs a question. What next? What are we to expect? If history is any guide, we know that in 1940 and early 1941, the Soviet Union went to great lengths to prevent war or at least delay its outbreak. To this end, the USSR sought not to provoke the potential aggressor until the very end by refraining or postponing the most urgent and obvious preparations it had to make to defend itself from an immediate attack. When it finally acted, it was too late. As a result, the country was not prepared to counter the invasion by Nazi Germany, which attacked our motherland on June 22nd, 1941, without declaring war. The country stopped the enemy and went on to defeat it, but this came at a tremendous cost. Those who aspire to global dominance have publicly designated Russia as their enemy. They did so with impunity. Make no mistake, they had no reason to act in this way. Even now, with NATO's eastward expansion, the situation for Russia has been becoming worse and more dangerous by the year. Moreover, these past days, NATO leadership has been blunt in its statements that they need to accelerate and step up efforts to bring the alliance infrastructure closer to Russia's borders. Any further expansion of the North Atlantic Alliance's infrastructure or the ongoing efforts to gain a military foothold of the Ukrainian territory are unacceptable to us. Of course, the question is not about NATO itself. It merely serves as a tool of US foreign policy. For the United States and its allies, it is a policy of containing Russia with obvious geopolitical dividends. For our country, it is a matter of life and death, a matter of our historical future as a nation. This is not an exaggeration. This is a fact. It is not only a very real threat to our interests, but to the very existence of our state and to its sovereignty. It is the red line which we have spoken about on numerous occasions. They have crossed it. This brings me to the situation in Donbass. We can see that the forces that staged the coup in Ukraine in 2014 have seized power, are keeping it with the help of ornamental election procedures, and have abandoned the path of a peaceful conflict settlement. For 8 years, for 8 endless years, we have been doing everything possible to settle the situation by peaceful political means. Everything was in vain. As I said in my previous address, you cannot look without compassion at what is happening there. It became impossible to tolerate it. We had to stop that atrocity, that genocide of millions of people who lived there and who pinned their hopes on Russia, on all of us. It is their aspirations, the feelings and pain of these people that were the main motivating force behind our decision to recognize the independence of the Donbass People's Republics. I would like to additionally emphasize the following. Focused on their own goals, the leading NATO countries are supporting the far-right nationalists and neo-Nazis in Ukraine, those who will never forgive the people of Crimea and Sevastopol for freely making a choice to reunite with Russia. They will undoubtedly try to bring war to Crimea just as they have done in Donbass, to kill innocent people just as the members of the punitive units of the Ukrainian nationalists and Hitler's accomplices did during the Great Patriotic War. They have also openly claimed to several other Russian regions. In this context, in accord with Article 51, Chapter 7 of the UN Charter, with permission of Russia's Federal Council and an execution of the treaties of friendship and mutual assistance with the Donetsk People's Republic and the Lugansk People's Republic, ratified by the Russian Assembly on February 22, I made a decision to carry out a special military operation. The purpose of this operation is to protect people who for 8 years now have been facing humiliation and genocide perpetrated by the Kiev regime. To this end, we will seek to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine, as well as bring to trial those who perpetrated numerous bloody crimes against civilians, including against citizens of the Russian Federation. It is not our plan to occupy Ukrainian territory. We do not intend to impose anything on anyone by force. I would like also to address the military personnel of the Ukrainian armed forces. Comrade officers, your fathers, grandfathers, and great-grandfathers did not fight the Nazi occupiers and did not defend our common motherland to allow today's neo-Nazis to seize power in Ukraine. You swore the oath of allegiance to the Ukrainian people and not to the junta, the people's adversary, which is plundering Ukraine and humiliating the Ukrainian people. I urge you to refuse to carry out their criminal orders. I urge you to immediately lay down arms and go home. I will explain what this means. The military personnel of the Ukrainian army who do this will be able to freely leave the zone of hostility and return to their families. So those are basically just some highlights of this much longer address by President Vladimir Putin. And you can read the whole thing. I had a lot of trouble getting a hold of the entire text because the Russian outlet that carried it was being massively attacked, and you just simply could not get into it. But I did finally find a copy of the text on Bloomberg. So this one comes from Bloomberg, not from the r.ru news service that actually carried it to begin with. And there will be a link for that along with all the other articles actually in our information below this video.
I think the most interesting part was where he implied that Stalin had made a mistake in dealing with the original Nazis.
Yeah.
And I don't know too much of. I might want to take that with a grain of salt because
Yeah.
Putin.
Well, I do know a lot about it, and he's just dead wrong.
Okay.
But that's Putin. I'm not speaking for Putin. Putin did what was right after dragging his fucking ass for 8 years. Okay, let's applaud him for that. But a lot of what he said in this address this morning was dead wrong. Not the particulars about why he did what he did and why the Russian military has gone in there and taken out the command and control structure of the Ukrainian military, of the Nazi regime that runs Ukraine. But in a lot of his historical points, he's just dead wrong. But, that's him. That's not us. I applaud what he did that was right, and I condemn what he said that was wrong. And it was wrong what he said about the German Russian pact that the Russian or the Soviet Russian pact that the Soviet people made with Germany in I believe it was 1938. Molotov-Ribbentrop pact. Yeah, I mean, there were very good reasons why Stalin did that, and Stalin had to do that to buy himself. And the other fact about that is that every other major European country also had non-aggression pacts with Nazi Germany. Britain had such a pact. France had such a pact. I mean, Italy. Well, Italy was a friend of Germany, but I mean, all of the major European countries had pacts like that during that same period of time. So it wasn't anything particular about Russia. Russia was doing what everyone else was doing, and that was buying themselves some time, some very absolutely necessary, needed time to prepare. And Putin is wrong about that.
Well, it's still true, obviously, that this is a humanitarian intervention.
Yeah.
The very kind of humanitarian intervention that the West constantly claims it's carrying out in places like Libya and Syria, but that it never actually carries out.
Right.
We have so much better reason to really believe that this is a humanitarian intervention than to believe Washington when it says so. And that's because, well, firstly, Russia is a historic victim of aggression from the very political faction that is ideologically dominant within Ukraine. It's historically a victim of aggression from what's crudely called the West in general. And now Washington has made sure that history repeats itself. Because a crucial piece of context is that a Ukrainian invasion of these autonomous republics has been imminent. Ukraine has really been bearing down upon all of these innocent people, and for the worst reason imaginable. They aren't doing this for. They certainly aren't doing it for a humanitarian purpose. They're doing it for the opposite purpose. They want to exterminate, or at the very least terrorize, millions of people for their ethnicity, because, well, that's the way that Nazis think. They see genocide as an integral part of warfare, and Washington has naturally had something in common with that. Like right from the start, the U.S. settler colonial project is what directly inspired Nazism and its vision for stealing land, exterminating the inhabitants for the sake of building the so-called superior nation.
Right.
And that's the strategy that Washington has been using in Ukraine. Now Russia is pushing back against this. And this is the context that nobody that you see in surface level discourse is ever going to acknowledge. I don't really think that they care that much, frankly. However much they might say stuff like, oh, I think what's going on in Ukraine is really tragic. I feel so sorry for these victims. They don't know what the hell they're talking about, and they're not going to look into it.
Exactly. Well put. Next on our list is NATO's Nazis in Ukraine, anti-Russian war, propaganda, and our human crisis by Rainer Shea.
This was inspired by a speech I found on YouTube this last week that was read by the actor Viggo Mortensen.
Yeah.
And he was reading this 1946 lecture by the great writer Albert Camus called The Human Crisis. And Camus' thesis is that in the era of capitalism, colonialism, and imperialism, our environment has twisted us in a way that's made us view the worst atrocities imaginable as completely banal things, not horrors to be condemned as soon as you see them, but as really just normal parts of life. You can't get too worked up about them, can you? Because it's just politics. And Camus observed how these conditions have made it so that no person is considered human in the way that they should be considered human. It's recontextualized human beings to make them all tools in a great political game. It's also cynical. It's also nihilistic. There's no moral groundings for the prevailing ideology. And it's this mindset, Camus observes, that can theoretically let somebody like Hitler be praised because in the worldview of capitalism, colonialism, and imperialism, which makes it so that whoever wins is by default right, then Hitler could theoretically be praised in the cultural hegemony if he were to have won the war. And this is what Washington is now trying to make reality by campaigning to bring the Nazis back into power throughout that region, and by trying to make the Nazis win against Russia. But as we've seen, it's kind of been a pipe dream from the start, this idea that they can subdue Russia by reviving Nazism. I mean, like you said, Russia has always been on the verge of putting the foot down, and it seems like they're really holding back. They're not invading in the way that we were told they were going to invade, like by conquering and committing some kind of genocide against the people of Ukraine. Despite whatever the propaganda you hear online and this rhetoric says, that's simply not the case. Russia is the humanitarian actor in this situation.
Yes, absolutely. To me, especially since 2014, when Obama did the war crime that he did, when Obama engineered, supported, armed, funded, and directed the Nazis and fascists in Ukraine in their bloody, utterly illegal coup d'etat, which, by the way, makes every government in Ukraine since that time illegal. The Zelensky regime currently is illegal. It is not a legitimate regime in the first place because it came about through a Nazi coup, a Nazi fascist coup d'etat, bloody to a great extent, that was engineered by an imperial power halfway around the world called the American Empire, and by Barack Obama himself. And yet, in all these years since, in the 8 years intervening, we never hear about Barack Obama bringing a Nazi regime to power in Ukraine. Not to mention the other fascist and Nazi regimes that he and other presidents brought into power in other countries prior to that time and since that time. It's just astounding to me. And yeah, I mean, like you say, there's reasons behind it, but just the fact that you never, ever hear anyone saying this, or hardly ever. I mean, you've really got to search to find someone saying what you and I are saying right now about this utter crime against humanity by the American empire. So it's a terrible, terrible thing. Next on the list, make everyone a weapon. U.S. empire intensifies propaganda war by Rainer Shea.
This is what we're seeing right now with all of this rhetoric about how Russia is the one that's in the wrong. The explicit stated goal of the NATO's cognitive warfare in recent years has been to turn everyone into a weapon. This is the phrasing of a 2020 report on the nature of cognitive warfare that was funded by NATO. And they said that the goal of cognitive warfare, which they now see as equally important as all the other types of warfare, is to utilize individual human beings for the purpose of waging war. And what does this mean? Like try to visualize that. What does it mean to turn everyone into a weapon? It means that in the eyes of these military strategists, the sentiments of the public, especially in the age of social media, are indispensable towards the victory of U.S. hegemony. U.S. hegemony, they believe, can only continue to exist if enough of the people around the world are persuaded to believe Washington's narratives. And this doesn't mean that everybody has to love the concept of the U.S. empire. It just means everyone has to passively go along with these dumb narratives, whether these narratives are directed against Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, Assad, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba. It's interchangeable. And what they all have in common is a very surface level, you could say anti-intellectual vilification of the designated enemies.
Next on the list, this is a PSL statement. That's Party of Socialism and Liberation. I've picked them as on this question, although I could have picked others. They had a pretty good statement about it. Why workers should oppose the far right Canadian trucker convoy, Party of Socialism and Liberation. This is from February 18th, 2022. Let's see here. Where are we? Here we go. From its beginning, the so-called Freedom Convoy in Canada has been a vehicle for the far right to promote their views and press their reactionary demands. Despite being labeled the trucker protest by corporate media, it does not represent the interests of workers in the trucking industry or otherwise. Its leadership from the beginning included far-right political figures and former police and security state employees. If met, its main demand to end the vaccine mandate wouldn't, I'm sorry, let me say that more correctly, wouldn't improve workers' lives, but would instead do the exact opposite by sending them back to the job in the new normal with less health and safety protections. Some online pundits influential with socialists and progressives have muddied the waters and are praising the protest as some kind of workers' uprising against the bosses. The Party for Socialism and Liberation opposes the far-right convoy and the broader anti-vaccine movement that imperils the lives of working people. A major police operation began in the early morning of February 18th in Ottawa after weeks of extremely lenient or even openly supportive treatment by police officers that gave the convoy a crucial room to grow. This reactionary movement has long since spread beyond Ottawa and may now have the capacity to persist despite the police action. In fact, it has become a worldwide phenomenon, inspiring similar actions in France, Belgium, and the United States. The Teamsters Union in Canada represents 55,000 drivers, including 15,000 long-haul truckers. 90% of them are vaccinated. The head of the Teamsters in Canada released a statement titled, "The Real Enemy for Truckers is COVID-19, in which he argued that the despicable display of hate led by the political right and the shamefully encouraged by elected conservative politicians does not reflect the values of the Canadian Teamsters, nor the vast majority of our members, and in fact has served to delegitimize the real concerns of most truckers today." The Canadian Labour Congress, the federation of the main unions in Canada that collectively represent 3 million workers, issued a statement pointing out that frontline workers, from retail to health workers, have been bullied and harassed. We have witnessed noise attacks, keeping families up at all hours. We have seen right-wing extremists spreading messages filled with racism and intolerance, flying the Nazi and Confederate flags alongside other symbols of violence and hate. Canada's unions stand together unequivocally opposed to these vile and hateful messages and condemn the ongoing harassment and violence against the people of Ottawa. The CLC also highlighted how authorities spend the first week taking a hands-off approach to the occupation of city streets and parks, not even handing out parking tickets, as big rigs blocked busy intersections and local businesses were forced to shutter. This is a far cry from the kinds of crackdowns we have seen in the past towards Indigenous land protests, Black Lives Matter, and other equality-seeking activists or striking workers. Regardless of the social composition of a mass movement, its leadership and the political program it puts forward are decisive. It is possible for a movement composed of working class people to raise reactionary demands that are against the interests of the working class as a whole. The New York City teachers' strike of 1968, for instance, was organized to oppose Black community control of schools in Brooklyn. A movement by Chilean truckers in the early 1970s played a crucial role in the CIA-sponsored military coup against the elected Marxist president, Salvador Allende. Last year, mobilizations of truck drivers were held along major highways in Brazil to support the political agenda of fascist President Jair Bolsonaro. The Solidarity Trade Union in Poland became the principal vehicle for capitalist counter-revolution in that country. The main demand of the Freedom Convoy is for the cancellation of a vaccine mandate for truckers who travel internationally. Currently, Canadian truckers must be vaccinated to enter the United States. This mandate was enacted in response to the surge of the Omicron variant in order to help curtail the spread of this extremely contagious virus. Similar types of vaccine mandates are routinely used in the U.S. schools and around the world as a common sense practice in the interests of the population's health. In order to defeat an epidemic, a vaccine must be administered to the vast majority of the population. If the vaccine rates are not high enough, it is impossible for the disease to go away. As of this writing, more than 35,000 people in Canada and 925,000 people in the United States have died from COVID, a high proportion of whom frontline workers, often employed in low-wage service sector jobs that involve frequent interactions with the public, and the long-term ramifications of having contracted the disease is a source of great concern. A recent study published in Nature magazine, for instance, indicated that COVID significantly increases one's chances of heart disease in the months after infection. The most elementary democratic right is the right to live, and socialists believe in social responsibility and common sense public health measures that would greatly reduce the death and damage caused by COVID-19.
Now, this is how reactionaries, not just reactionaries, but outright Nazis, are capable of exploiting the contradictions of capitalism. Because in a place like China, these kinds of issues simply don't come up. China is a dictatorship of the proletariat, so whatever vaccine they have is surely a lot less prone to risks than the vaccines here. With I mean, this is a place where pharmaceutical companies are effectively the dictators of our government. they rule with an iron fist, and they can do whatever they want, push whatever narrative, and cover up whatever they want. So there's a grain of truth to the basic concern that vaccines in general are lacking in as much accountability as they should have, as much oversight as they should have. But there are people who take the position that nobody should be getting the vaccine, not just the people who are immunocompromised. They say should be refusing it, but everybody should be refusing it because supposedly it's that much of an unambiguous poison. And that's where things get dangerous. That's where things get toxic. And it's interesting that the PSL is where the statement has come from, because I've been thrust into this drama within the PSL. I'm not going to name any names here, but in this last half year, one member of the PSL who I knew personally, who was local and was a really promising organizer, suddenly up and left the PSL because they were angry that the PSL wasn't taking this position pushed by so-called socialist pundits like Jimmy Dore, that the vaccine is this unambiguously dangerous force. And Jimmy Dore he's pushed a lot of clearly false information for the sake of gaining views. And that's not surprising. Vaccine videos get by far the most views on his channel. And the consequence was that this person left the PSL and weakened the global communist movement for the sake of this stupid controversy. And I think that goes to show that we really need to be careful in what information we accept and what actions we take. Because if you're not careful, you might be spouting nonsense and aligning yourself with people like this.
Well put. Well put. Right. Next on the list, what will anti-colonial socialist revolution look like? Rainer Shea.
This pertains to a pertinent issue this week, which is self-determination of nations. And Lenin wrote, as I quote in my article, that communists should not allow the concept of self-determination of nations to be exploited by the imperialists, by the bourgeoisie, for the sake of breaking up revolutions. I mean, this is the tactic that the imperialists are attempting right now in places like Taiwan, Xinjiang, Tibet, and Hong Kong. They're claiming that these places should break away from China for the sake of autonomy. But the context is different in different class contexts, because it's definitely a good thing that those two republics in Ukraine got granted autonomy because they are
independence.
Yeah, independence. That seems like an important distinction because now theoretically they are closer to socialism. Russia is a capitalist state now, and should they choose socialism, Putin won't be able to stop them.
Yeah, they are called the People's Republics of Lugansk and Donetsk.
Yes. Let's see where that leads. And the equivalent is a case in a place like the United States, where hundreds of indigenous nations are having their ancestral homelands occupied, and they only control a tiny fraction of the land that they rightfully control. So that land contradiction needs to be rectified. But at the same time, we shouldn't let the bourgeoisie exploit the concept of self-determination for their nefarious ends.
Yeah, absolutely. And, The concept of self-determination for nations is there's a specificity here. This is the self-determination, the right of the self-determination of oppressed nations and oppressed nationalities. We're not talking about the self-determination of an evil empire and a settler colonial empire like the United States, the most powerful state in the world, having the right to self-determination. It deserves no right. It's an oppressor nation, not an oppressed nationality. Very similarly, the people of Tibet, the people of Hong Kong, the people of Xinjiang are not oppressed nationalities. They are people whose nations went through a socialist workers' revolution and established a socialist workers' state in China. They voluntarily agreed to be a part of that effort. So they are not oppressed nationalities either. The people of Lugansk, the people of Donetsk, yes, they are oppressed nationalities who have declared their independence and whose independence has now been recognized by Russia, by far the largest and most powerful country in that region. So, it takes a little finesse to understand these concepts, but they're important concepts. And they're concepts that lead towards socialist revolution. So, very good point there. Next on the list, how two U.S. athletes effortlessly subverted information war against Beijing in 2022 Winter Olympics. This is by Danny Haiphong, our good friend who's been on the show a few times. And it appears in Friends of Socialist China, which is a nationwide group of Friends of Socialist China. And they have a website where they ran this article. It was originally on that site, Friends of Socialist China, but the article, I think, has appeared in other places as well by now. So this article says, few events have been more politicized than the Beijing 2022 Winter Olympics. New Cold Warriors and atrocity propagandists led by the United States did everything in their power to generate popular support for a full boycott of the games. NED-backed organizations formed a coalition for the cause, and the corporate media engaged in a full-scale China bad propaganda blitz. And the political establishment got busy crafting several pieces of legislation to respond to the so-called China threat. Their efforts failed. To save face, the U.S. implemented a non-consequential diplomatic boycott that found support from only a handful of junior partners in the West. However, failure did not put an end to the US-led information war at the heart of the boycott campaign. American and Western mainstream journalists attending the games have used the opportunity to intensify the spread of anti-China propaganda. Chinese-American skier Elaine Gu has been repeatedly targeted for choosing to represent China. Her decision triggered an intense backlash rooted in racist attitudes which are prevalent across the US political spectrum. Elaine Gu was repeatedly labeled a traitor to the United States and even the nation. A so-called progressive media outlet was willing to publish, that is The Nation, the magazine, was willing to publish an article citing a literal white supremacist organization just to defame her. US media propaganda only became more and more absurd as the games moved forward. The smears against Elaine Gu continued, except this time with a liberal flavor. The New York Times and Vice attempted to portray Gu as an anti-hero of the feminist ideal, a successful young woman who chose to represent a country, China, which oppresses the majority of its women. US corporate media also informed its audiences that Elaine Gu's grandmother does not approve of her skiing career. A rumor mill surrounding Elaine Gu was entirely unsourced and merely exploited woke liberal talking points to further smear the young skier's reputation and, by extension, China. NBC spent nearly the entire opening ceremony, repeating each and every talking point of the US's new Cold War against China. Furthermore, everything about the Beijing 2022 Olympics was labeled evidence of a China dystopia. Workers in hazmat suits poured drinks. Dystopia. China's use of fake snow, a common practice at prior Winter Olympics games. Dystopia. American foods like French fries, not up to American standards in Beijing. Well, there's nothing more dystopian than that. 2 US athletes participating in the Winter Olympics effortlessly subverted these desperate attempts to defame China. US skateboarder Tessa Maud used her TikTok account to chronicle her experiences in China. Maud frequently indicated that she was having the time of her life. A number of her posts praised the local cuisine available to athletes at the game. Her genuine expression of appreciation for the staff and volunteers at the Winter Olympic Games went viral in China. US skier Aaron Blanc offered stark criticism of the mainstream media's coverage of the Olympics. Blanc stated that he didn't really know what to expect. Being stateside, you've kind of heard some pretty bad media, and that is completely false. It's actually been phenomenal. He followed these remarks with praise of China's COVID-19 protocol and overall performance as a host. Everybody from staff to COVID testers to accommodation, it's probably honestly one of the better Olympics that we've been to, Blanc said. Twitter rewarded Blanc by suspending his account in a blatant act of censorship. Blanc revealed through his honest account of the Beijing Olympics that not even the most reasonable criticism of the US's information war against China is allowable in mainstream circles. He responded by sharing a post on Instagram that contained the following question: what did I do? That's a good question. The answer is quite clear. Speech is only free in the United States so long as it doesn't anger against the grain of the US's new Cold War agenda. Another good question: why did Tessa Maud and Aaron Blunk seemingly innocuous comments so powerfully challenge the US-led propaganda war against China? Neither Maud nor Blanc made any formal political statement. They didn't use their platforms to oppose US military aggression, sanctions, or other policy manifestation of the new Cold War against China. Maud simply had a great time in the Beijing 2022 Winter Olympics and appreciated the warmth that she received from the Chinese people. Blanc merely pointed out a discrepancy between what the US media says about the Beijing 2022 Winter Olympics and the reality of the experience for athletes such as himself. Maud and Blanc provided a great service to the cause of peace without even trying. The information war against China relies upon a steady stream of racism to legitimize the US's imperialist ambitions. China is portrayed by the US and the West as the quintessential communist nightmare. Chinese people in this scenario are nothing but robotic slaves to an authoritarian regime. Maud and Blanc's willingness to tell the truth about their positive experiences at the Beijing 2022 Winter Olympics effortlessly subverted the dominant imperialist narrative about China. Karl Marx taught us that contradictions of a given phenomenon are in a constant process of change, which is often characterized by conflict. The contradictions of the US-led new Cold War have reached a particularly acute stage where the China bad narrative is completely discredited by the realities of the world situation. China's success in areas of economic growth, technological development, and poverty alleviation are recognized throughout much of the world. The US has gained this has gained recognition as the biggest threat to world peace. This has caused a pressing dilemma for those committed to hegemony-driven aims of the US-led new Cold War on China. As the US's legitimacy wanes worldwide, its anti-China propaganda campaign has reached a fevered pitch to compensate for imperial decline. Humanizing China represents a direct threat to the Cold War agenda. China must be viewed as all bad, a modern-day fascistic terror on the world stage. If China's prestige grows among Americans or Westerners, then the possibility emerges that the system of imperialism driving the new Cold War will be exposed as the true nightmare to humanity that it is. The US athletes would praise China's COVID-19 response or hospitality opens the door to friendship and cooperation with a so-called adversary. Any acknowledgement of China's achievement is thus viewed as a crime of the highest order.
Right. And I've seen some lowest common denominator propaganda when it's come to the Beijing Olympics. There was an animation on Reddit, and you know, Reddit is, it has such a reputation for being anti-China in a really stale and monotonous way. They have the same joke. It's pretty much the same joke, the social credit joke. And someone on Reddit made an animation that was just images flashing of virus, the virus image, and the 1 million social credit image, and these racist slanty-eyed images, and Winnie the Pooh's flashing everywhere. Its only purpose was to activate the parts of the American mind that have been ingrained so deeply with this racism, and they're supposed to chuckle at it. Yeah, social credit. It's so stupid.
Okay, so that's it for tonight. Want to thank everybody for tuning in. Thank you, Rainer, for your special contribution. Thank all of our viewers. And please join us again next week when we'll have another episode of Revolutionary Socialist Review. Until then, I bid you a sweet adieu.